Michaela Chester here for NCAA.com, and I'm joined by Michelle Durban again. She's the NCAA D1 Women's Volleyball Committee Chair. And Michelle, it must have been a long day or weekend of deliberations for you. Can you describe how it went today and in these last few days and what the biggest decisions were for you guys?
Absolutely. Well, we got here on Friday at about 2:30 and have worked pretty much nonstop, it feels like, since till about 12:30 today. We finally finished everything and finalized it. But I think the parity that we have seen this year in college volleyball, with constant upsets, and you start thinking one team is really going to pick it up, and then all of a sudden another team comes along. So I think that's been a really fun year of volleyball. It definitely made our job difficult this weekend. So I think that the fans are in for a treat for this tournament this year.
So Baylor kept the number one spot, then Texas, Stanford, Wisconsin. Can you take me through that decision of putting Wisconsin in at that number four spot over some other teams that were in deliberation?
Yes, absolutely. Of course, we have some parameters that we have to follow per the NCAA guidelines, and that's win-loss, head-to-head, strength of schedule, common opponents, and then, of course, RPI comes into play. So when we were looking at 4, 5, 6, we do a lot of head-to-head deliberations, and when it came down to it, Wisconsin has 4 top 10 wins. And they won strength of schedule as well as the non-conference strength of schedule when comparing them to Nebraska and to Pitt. And then in terms of the 5, we had Nebraska, who had a 1 win over a top 10 team as well, and then also had a higher strength of schedule and non-conference strength of schedule. So that kind of came into play. Pitt did not have any top 10 wins. And so when we were looking at total body of work, that came into play.
How did Friday and Saturday's result affect the bracket, if any? I mean, Penn State beat Wisconsin. Did that have an effect? And then Minnesota beat Penn State.
Absolutely. We were here very late last night watching matches. Of course, we had the Penn State Minnesota match going. We had Washington State. We had the Big Sky Conference Championship going. So there was a lot of volleyball still being played out that was affecting which teams were getting into the tournament, as well as where we were going to be able to place teams for seeding purposes. So this weekend definitely had some matches that affected where people went and why.
You just mentioned that Washington State one. So Washington State upset Washington for the second time. This is a team that was in your previous top 10. They have some big wins, but then also a lot of losses this season. So how did you consider Washington when seeding them in the top 16?
Well, we looked at total body of work, of course. And so I think, they're in the Pac-12, and based on the RPI, that is the top conference in the country. So we definitely had to look at them. Of course, having that loss last night to finish with Washington State definitely created some colorful discussion this morning when we came back at 7:30.
I'm sure it did. And then another big thing that happened last week, St. John's beat both Creighton and Marquette. And that's something that a lot of people weren't expecting to happen. Here you have Creighton and Marquette, who were in and out of the top 10 all season and probably expected one of those teams to be the automatic qualification. And now you have two teams that are vying for a spot. So how did you look at those two?
Well, we looked at Marquette and Creighton, and of course, Creighton losing in the semifinals to St. John's was definitely a factor when we were talking about them. And then to have Marquette lose in the championship at home to St. John's was definitely part of the top 16 discussion.
Okay, and towards the lower tier of the tournament hosts, there's some new names in the mix. What was the point of discussion regarding those last few hosts versus the non-hosts?
Well, of course, we go back to, really looking at head to head, and then it becomes body of work and all the parameters that I mentioned before. And so based on where we thought they were finishing the season in terms of last 10 does come into effect. And those were the teams that got those top 16. We also looked at who had good wins, but also who was on the right side of the chart for what we would say significant losses when we're starting to look at those final 16 and where those fit in.
Okay, and of course, with ranking these teams, it affects the locations and who's playing who in each regional. How much did that affect where you ranked the teams?
Well, in terms of top 16, we try not to have that come into play. We actually don't even know who has put in for a bid when we are ranking them, purposefully, I think, so that we're not trying to maneuver anyway. So that really is based on those parameters that are set forth. And then, of course, we do have a few new teams in, but based on how they played and where they finished in the RPI, we felt that they had, earned the right to be able to be a top 16 seed and be able to host the first and second round.
All right, and lastly, Michelle, what are some probable future matchups that the committee is really looking forward to?
Well, there's a few. I think, one thing that we all talked about is we think that there could be some upsets this year just based on the regular season. We feel like, we saw it this weekend in the Big East Championship, and we think that we could see that this weekend. But I think a couple that are intriguing to us, if it goes according to where we think seeding wise, I think Washington and Colorado State. Colorado State has had a great year. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how that works out, depending on if they're able to make it out. I think another one that's interesting is Baylor and Southern Cal. I think that, you have kind of that normal Southern Cal, people kind of expect them. Baylor up and coming, and getting to host and being number one for the first time. So I think that would be an interesting one. And then I think another one would be the BYU Utah potential rematch, because they play each other, that rivalry. And I think that could be an interesting match to watch as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Michelle. I know you've had a busy day, so I'll let you get back to it.
All right.